Damn, I forgot the name of the show, but it was pretty good. It's an Amazon one, and it's based off a William Gibson novel, and it's a sci-fi thing. But anyways, the thing is, okay, they get this game, and it's supposed to be a sim, and and you do these tasks or whatever, and they're doing it for money, right? And they're supposed to prototype this new technology, and so it's like a black market type of thing, right? And so they go into the sim, and then they complete the task. They're supposed to get some kind of bounty, and so they go, and later she finds out like she's going into the future, and she's in like a robot. But it was pretty cool. And then like in the future, it's like less humanity or whatever. But like they do, I guess it was like nanobot like programming of like reality. So like they could like, which was kind of interesting. I think it's the Peripheral. But anyways, it's pretty good. It's interesting. I like that idea of consciousness like traveling. Like I think that's time travel, space travel. It's like consciousness like traveling, I guess, sending consciousness, and it's getting received into like a cyborg body into the future. And then they said like once you do that, then it like diverts the timelines. But I don't know if they're just saying that to like keep her like in the dark or whatever. But anyways, it's kind of interesting. Concept of like time travel or like a sci-fi premise to like explore.
I'll have to check it out. Yeah,
but it doesn't surprise me because William Gibson always had crazy concepts. I mean,
never read them.
Yeah,
tell me about one.
Well, if you like William Gibson, you should give Greg Egan a try. Neuromancer came out in 1984. How long ago is that? 14 years. Hard to believe it's a work of ancient history, Neuromancer, a thing of another stratum in the archaeology of the 20th century. Greg Egan, thinking along the same lines, imagines downloads where it's not that you put on goggles and gloves, but that you actually become code, and pushes the reductionist notion of biology that we are code anyway to its logical conclusion, and says code is code whether it knows it's code or not. And it may turn out to be true that somehow consciousness can be digitized and exist in some kind of electronic simulacrum of itself. One of the first consequences of that, which is quite interesting, is a funny thing happens to time. Because as we sit here talking, we're running at about 100 hertz. If you could be downloaded into circuitry on a fast machine, say 400 megahertz machine, 10 minutes is long enough to live your life over several times in all its rich detail, right down to the last Cheerio eaten and the last nose blown. So a weird kind of like synthetic eternity springs into view. You can imagine a world where people, as they approach death, would decide whether, will it be the big D, death, or the little d, digital. And you could buy certain amounts of time in digital existence at the brink of biological death, enough to have your life 10 times over, 1,000 times over, 100,000 times over. And this seems absurd, or maybe it seems absurd. It's closer, I think, than most people realize. I mean, there are questions. It's either closer than most people realize, or it's not possible at all. It has to do with really fundamental questions, like what is the self? What is consciousness? Can we reduce it? Can we play it like an LP record? Can we reduce it to a string of numbers? To what degree is it true that as biological beings, what we are essentially three-dimensional computers? You know, the DNA codes into RNA, which is read through a ribosome. That's like a head reader. It executes a program which makes proteins, and these proteins fold into three-dimensional shapes, and then lo and behold, all these three-dimensional shapes fit together in such a way that you emerge out of the atomic murk of this process. Well, it's our faith that somewhere in there the hand of God has to be extended to make it all go. But there are hardcore materialists who say, you know, that's just romantic nonsense, the sort of romantic nonsense they've been chasing down for centuries and nailing to the barn door, and that a day will come when software will be sentient as you and I are sentient, and where machines of all sorts will routinely pass Turing tests, and other things, you know, lie in the same time frame as that kind of stuff. In Egan's fiction, he's talking 25 to 30 years in the future for downloads of human consciousness into circuitry. He's also talking about artificial life, artificial intelligence, sentient software, software which knows it's software, but which also has some deeper grasp of its existential dilemma somehow. This whole question, you know, what's happened is we come into the 20th century, or much of the discussion of the 20th century in the sciences was around the working out the implications of the universe viewed as something made out of space, time, matter, energy, magnetic fields, so forth and so on, and the equations for this and the relativistic transforms and all this were worked out. Well, meanwhile, people like Norbert Wiener and well, it will come to me, but Norbert Wiener, the author of Cybernetics primarily, began around 1948 to advance the idea that information was an important concept, and that in fact information could be opposed to the idea of entropy. Entropy was a well-established notion in physics, and you know was very friendly to schizophrenic existential novel writing of the sort that you get in Gravity's Rainbow. Over the whole last half of Gravity's Rainbow, it's the idea of entropy that basically drives Roger Slothrop around the bend. So thermodynamic entropy, a concept out of physics that basically says everything falls apart. Ultimately, everything, all order gives way to disorder. All unity gives way to disunity. The end state of the universe will be a dark, cold, homogeneous, low energy nothing. But Norbert Wiener and these other people began to talk about information as some kind of countervailing force, and that systems, to be systems, to come into existence and maintain their systemic integrity, had to express themselves through information. And this intuition, you know, was spectacularly confirmed in 1950 when DNA was characterized and they began to understand how it works, and you know that these codons are coding for these amino acids, that it's an information conservation and transfer system. And this trend, the informational transformation of the world, has now reached the place where there's been some kind of like philosophical ebb of the tide. Information is now primary. those other concepts, space, time, matter, energy, those are mathematical constructs and metaphors that are themselves states of information. So it's like we've overcome naive realism, which was this space-time matter-energy thing, the belief, that chemistry and physics, and that you could hypothesize an uninvolved observer and actually model based on that assumption and get some worthwhile thing back. All that's given way to this much stickier, trickier, but more grown-up idea that language exists in the world, language is a constant growth of semantic trees toward different kinds of closure under the aegis of these Chomskyan deep structural rules or some other rules similar but not yet known, and that mind is entangled in all of this. That nothing is what it appears to be. And that beneath everything lies this flickering quantum mechanical domain of reverse logic, counterintuitive forms of causal relationships, and that basically the whole thing is a thin smear of paradox, if it's anything at all. So the evolution of technology based on these insights and perceptions reinforces this idea. The theme being here, the rise of the power of the concept of information as a primary datum of being, as the primary datum of being. Well, so then everything turns into digitizable bits, numerically definable flows of data at every level, in biology, in your own body, in computer software generated by human minds that is in the extended culture at large. The whole thing begins to look like a kind of Gnostic descent into matter of an organizing principle that drives it or lifts it toward higher states of organization. And of course, we're part of this. I mean, we're the most spectacular part of this, human beings, human culture, and we're at a spectacular juncture with this, because these machines we're building with 400 megahertz processors and that talk to each other endlessly over the internet, they are literally making time. They are making vast more time than biology could make or occupy. The event rate at which the cascades of biology succeed each other is so slow that in the megahertz range, looking back at that, it's like watching the motion of glaciers or the planets orbiting around the star. So these machines have carved open a new dimension of time, the micro-physical dimension, not travel into the future, but a weird kind of explosive expansion of the now through the conjuring rod of electronic circuitry. And that's just one aspect of what crossing the boundary into machine domains of time and relationships to machine intelligence would offer. But given that the business of the artist is to transform information, all of this is big news. How larger institutions of the culture deal with this is not my interest, but how individuals can, could, and should, in my opinion, deal with it is by really elaborating more compelling forms of art than anybody has ever seen. I mean, that's what we're clearing the decks for, is to really unleash the imagination on previously undreamed of scales. So any thoughts about that, or is that enough of all that? Well, if you liked Photoshop, you should just keep going with, learn to use Premiere, and then there are many modeling programs and animation, and it's endless, as I'm sure you can imagine. But, just mastery of tools. I mean, we all have this idea that we shouldn't learn anything after the age of 30 or something like that. I don't think you can live like that anymore. I mean, I could spend, if somebody would pay me, I could spend all my time learning software, learning to do things better and to bring more control to my art. And the software is endlessly evolving too. I mean, everything seems to be evolving together. I think you can never. The future is always more complicated than any ideological agenda imagines it. So, right at this moment, even as we're reaching toward virtual reality and immortality and whatnot, there are people scarifying themselves in the rainforest tonight and beating the log drums, and nothing has changed. So yeah, it's really about stretching out over a broader and broader spectrum. I have no problem with the people scarifying themselves in the rainforest. I'm all for that. What I don't like is the bulge in the middle of the snake, where millions and millions of people are narcoticizing themselves on mall culture and television. I mean, I'm not going to launch a moral crusade to take away people's daytime TV watching, but I certainly think that the basic thing is to build the tools, and then the smart people will use those tools to push the edge of novelty forward. And who are the smart people? Well, no, it's not an elite of class or an elite of money, although both of those things play into it. It's an elite of technological intelligence. There will be people in the slums of Shanghai who will be world leaders in this field simply out of their tenacious intelligence. That wonderful thing Gibson says in Neuromancer, the street finds its own uses for things. So in a way, it's the confounding of the other forms of hierarchy. In other words, class-based institutions, money-based institutions, race-based institutions are all having a very difficult time keeping up with what's going on. It seems it's more like a kind of anarchistic or chaotic situation where very creative individuals can move very fast. Cyberspace is a land of opportunity. We see example after example of this. People object and say, that the cyberspatial revolution is happening among white people and very classist and at the top of the social pyramid, and that there is an element of truth to that, but counterbalancing that is the observation that many people have made that no technology in history has fallen in cost as quickly and reached so many people as quickly as computers have. I mean, the computer of incalculable cost, hundreds of millions of dollars in 1950, is now $800. So, and this cost-benefit curve shows no end of slowing down. I mean, I look forward to the day when the equivalent of a new NT machine will be something that you'll put on your thumb like a decal. And these things will cost 35 cents a piece or $1.50 a piece. This, in principle, can be done. An ordinary piece of typing paper is 200,000 atoms thick. in a nanotechnological fabrication situation, do you know how much close packing you can do in a matrix 200,000 atoms thick? You can practically build a 747 into it if that's what you want to do.